first chapters throughout the saga, Vysogota, the Raven, and fictional mentors. Piper. Bubby, you're okay. What are you looking for? Oh, you want your bone, you silly lady. So I think that's it for the recording itself, though. I think my partner bought tickets to watch a movie. So.
I've just seen F1 and it's amazing. In a 4DX, it's like you're driving those cars. It's raining and we have like water. And then the cars, when there's a car crash, like you have the seat, like there are like some parts of the seat that hits you in the back of your car.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And the next day I woke up with back pain. It's like someone has been like trampling me.
Oh no. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a Global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from Good Morning, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hansa accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny Cyrilla of Sintra across the continent. Well, Piper and I are here to welcome you to Season 8 of Breakfast in Beauclair. This season we are covering Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, and we are doing something a little special this season. I'm going to be having two wonderful co-hosts join us. Starting with Chapter 2, you'll be able to come along with myself, Kitty from the US, and Sophie from the UK, the beloved leaders of our Hansa's Discord book club. I'm so excited to welcome them onto the show and to use their passion, their expertise on The Witcher throughout the season. As a fun little treat for you, today, September 4th, is actually the 7th birthday of my original Witcher project, Good Morn, which came out a year before Breakfast in Beauclair. Good Morn was a passion project that brought together 16th to 19th century etchings with quotes from The Witcher. And that aesthetic is the origin of the show artwork for Breakfast in Beauclair. You can find the project over at instagram.com/goodmorn. So I'm really excited about that and to revive that on its 7th birthday. And secondly, outside of Breakfast in Beauclair, I also work on a number of audio fiction series as an actor, producer, and story developer. Our production company, Lengthy Tangent, is currently crowdfunding for a number of audio fiction shows, including Peculiar Radio, Theme Party the Podcast, and the upcoming collection of Moira Graves. You can listen to all the shows wherever you listen to Breakfast in Beauclair. That's Peculiar Radio, Theme Party the Podcast, and later this month, the collection of Moira Graves. You can support the campaign on Indiegogo at igg.me/@/lengthytangent2025, or you can look up Lengthy Tangent on Indiegogo. This episode, we welcome Nate and Born Orpheus to our Hansa on Patreon. Thank you to our patrons and our producer-level patrons, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte from Vingerberg Glamorai, The Original Roach, Libby, John of Riblia, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam of Temeria, Softy, Lisa C., and Born Orpheus. If you would like to learn more about supporting Breakfast in Beauclair, visit patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Ryan from the US and Sophie from Morocco call in for Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 1. Join us as we discuss the moment you knew The Witcher was for you, how legends are born, first chapters throughout the saga, Vysogota, the Raven, and fictional mentors, and where morality ends and survival begins. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 1. Hey guys, welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and today we're welcoming two members of our Hansa to the show. My first guest is originally from Colorado, now living in Connecticut. He's bilingual, speaking English and Portuguese, and works as a biostatistician working for a cancer research team. Outside of work, he looks for any excuse to be outside: paddleboarding, spikeball, volleyball, and snowboarding. You'll recognize my second guest from their appearance on the show on episode 97, Baptism of Fire, Chapter 2. They're a webmaster and web designer from Casablanca, Morocco, and she speaks the Moroccan dialect, Arabic, English, and French. She loves cats, playing video games, watching movies, and hopes to travel the world. Please welcome Ryan from the US and Sophie from Morocco. Hi guys, how's it going?
Hi.
Hey, going good.
Yes, thank you guys so much for being the first recording of this season. I feel like I'm dusting off the cobwebs, as it were. Sophie, it's so lovely to have you back. And Ryan, welcome to the show. I know you're a longtime listener, but I would love to hear from you how you got into The Witcher and into Breakfast in Beauclair.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Super stoked to be here. I feel like I kind of got into The Witcher in the reverse order that most people do. I first saw like season one of the Netflix show
Mm.
and really enjoyed it. And from there, I went and played The Witcher 3 and absolutely loved it. You know, it's one of my all-time favorite games that I've played. And after I finished The Witcher 3, I was like, I haven't gotten enough out of this. I should probably go and read the books.
Yeah.
And I think I've read through them now from beginning to end at least twice. And I've just really enjoyed it. And that's kind of what brought me to listening to Breakfast in Beauclair. Just couldn't get enough of Witcher content.
Yeah, I feel like that's how everyone falls in. They're just like, the games are not enough.
Yeah.
The books are not enough. The show is not enough. It's a truly great place to be, I think, as a creator. What were some of the themes or the moments that like really drew you in, whether it was, you know, the show, the games, or the books?
I mean, I've always been a big fan of fantasy. I love Lord of the Rings, and I was just kind of looking for something along those lines because I'd reread The Lord of the Rings many times. And coming into The Witcher, I loved that it was just a lot more heavy and real. And the characters I felt like were so much more relatable than kind of like the idealized Tolkien characters. You know, you relate to them, but when you're listening to, you know, Peter Kenny's version of the audiobooks, you just really connect with the humanity of these characters and they're flawed and they're gritty and the Witcher world is pretty messy. And I don't know, it was just really immersive.
I love that. I feel like the fascinating thing about The Witcher in general is, as you said, it's very human and we're always following our protagonists, but they're not always heroes. When you look at other kinds of, you know, fantasy or sci-fi sorts of media, Superman is very in the zeitgeist right now. They are flawed, but still like good people and morally kind of upright characters for the most part. And I feel like we play so much in the grays in Sapkowski's universe, and it makes for a really compelling story.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
What was your moment that's like, aha, this is for me?
I think it probably was watching season one, episode one of The Witcher on Netflix, where you see the Kikimora fight, and it is just so intense and so fun. And that finishes up, and it's just him taking the trophy back into the village. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a really fun watch, you know, this is
Yeah.
going to be very cool.
So you were hooked like 0.01 seconds after the Netflix, like, doom, Ryan's in.
Pretty much.
Amazing. Sophie, I know that you obviously shared your like getting into the Witcher story, but in line with Ryan's thoughts, what was that aha moment for you where you're like, oh, I love this?
I discovered the books through Reddit, actually. When I was playing Witcher 3, I didn't know that there were books. And there's so much history between the characters that I didn't know about. So I went looking online, and the Reddit was praising the books. So that's how I got them. The moment when I felt, oh my God, this is amazing, this is for me. It's basically the short stories. They're my favorite, especially A Shard of Ice. That's the moment when I was like, this is a masterpiece. This is amazing.
Yeah. What about A Shard of Ice? For listeners, just to recap, that's a story where Geralt and Istrid are fighting over Yennefer, and she sends them the birds, and she breaks up with both of them as they're, you know, ready to fight to the death for her. But what was it about that that really caught your attention?
The interesting part about A Shard of Ice is that it's a story within a story. Sapkowski is taking inspiration from another Polish story, the story of the Ice Queen and the shard of ice. And whoever falls in love with her gets blinded by the shard of ice. So I had to look that up also. And I just got immersed in this world. Like Sapkowski, he takes these old tales and he retells them in a very twisted way. And it's very captivating.
Anything to add, Ryan?
No, I'm just curious though, what language did you read The Witcher in first? Because I see you're fluent in many languages.
I bought the books in English because I also got the audiobooks of Peter Kenny.
Yeah.
So I like to listen and read at the same time, but it's easier for me to read them in French. But it's because of Peter that I got them in English.
That's fair. His audio work is incredible.
He's amazing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I actually had listened to Tower of Swallows in the audiobook. I have them all, but I didn't really remember having listened to it, and it opened up with how immersive it is. Hearing Vysogota's voice was, wonderful. And I'm really excited to dive into that. But before we do, love to catch up with Sophie. Sophie, would love to hear about how your new ventures are going.
In the first meeting that we did, we talked about how I'm a webmaster, but now I've launched my new website. It's sophiadesigns.net, and it's just a new adventure for me because I want to travel the world. So now I'm experiencing the new freelance world, and it's exciting. It's also scary.
Yeah, I think speaking as a designer myself, I kind of dip my toe into freelance, but it's very daunting, I think, picking up clients and stuff like that. What kind of clients have you worked with, and what kind of clients would you like to work with?
I like to work with new creatives or entrepreneurs, small businesses, basically.
Amazing. Well, we'll hear Sophie's full pitch at the end of the show as well. So today we'll begin our discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows with Chapter 1, in which Vysogota discovers Ciri near his cottage and nurses her back to health. Here's a quick synopsis of the chapter from future Alyssa. In Chapter 1 of Tower of Swallows, the book opens with 2 interludes, a beggar's ballad of the Dundare massacre and a fable about a witcher girl who must pay dearly for her many gifts. The scene shifts to an unusually ominous autumn equinox. Blood-red moon, banshee cries, the wild hunt in the skies. Events summon Skellige read as omens of Ragnarok, death, or a disaster for Sintra's royalty. In the Temple of Melilli, Nenneke, Triss, and Yara share a vision of Ciri's bloodied face. Far to the south in Ebbing, a hermit named Vysogota awakes. 4 days later, while checking traps, he finds a black horse ensnared and nearby the battered body of a youth. Cleaning away the blood and dirt, he realizes it's a young woman, Ciri, and carries her to his hut. Drawing on medical skills unused for 50 years, Vysogota treats her infected wounds, eventually reviving her. Ciri insists she must flee. Bonhart has killed her friends, and Tawny Owl has scarred her. Too weak to leave, she stays, questioning Vysogota's supposed isolation and discovering he trades her food and news. He warns that horsemen are searching for her. They argue over missing days between her wounding and her rescue, and slowly their guard drops. Ciri perceives his scholarly past. He tells her of his life as a doctor, philosopher, and professor condemned to death in both the North and Nilfgaard for his writings. They trade an elven rhyme about a raven and a swallow, and agree to exchange their stories. Ciri begins her own account, a litany of betrayals by destiny, ideals, and people she trusted, countered by unexpected love and friendship among those she was told to shun. The chapter closes with a poetic passage. As they spoke, no one could see the old man and the ashen-haired girl hidden deep in the swamps. So now that we've heard a lovely synopsis from future Alyssa, I would love to hear from you guys about some of your overall thoughts, chapter highlights and lowlights.
I really love Tower of Swallows. It's hard for me to really rank the Witcher books, but just going back and diving into this chapter, I was just really engaged with the way Sapkowski sets up the narrative. I love that he opens up with, some anecdotes about the Wild Hunt. I feel like this is the first time we've kind of heard of them since Time of Contempt when they were chasing Ciri. I thought that was very exciting, that they're going to be around in this story. I just really enjoyed the dynamics between Vysogota and Ciri. The mutual distrust that we'll get into in our conversation, I think really sets up the storytelling framework that Sapkowski uses. I just find it really delightful.
Yeah. Sophia, what about you?
So this book, for me, it starts as the introduction in particular sounds like the beginning of a movie. The focus is on the image, the description of the scenery, the characters, even the cats in Vysogota's cottage. And there is a line that I keep reading throughout that chapter in particular. It's that no one could have seen that, for the cottage stood among reeds in a swamp where no one dared to venture. And that line is so special to me. And I keep reading it throughout the chapter. And it sets this cinematographic feel to this chapter in particular. That's what I love the most about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we'll close with a question about that. And we can really dive into that, I think, pretty like divisive part of the book and like that refrain that happens throughout like not just this chapter but literally the entire book. I think for me, as both of you have said, Tower of Swallows feels uniquely poetic, like in the way that Sapkowski kind of like holds and handles the prose. I think a lot of the other books are obviously like everything's very action oriented or like very political, and he does weave in moments of world building and kind of creating this like immersive scenery, but really, in my opinion, not in the way that he does in Tower of Swallows and in this opening in particular. So I think that there's a lot of passages that we'll, cover in later chapters and later episodes of the podcast that have really stuck with me through the years because they're so beautiful. And yeah, as we move ahead to the discussion questions, we start with these two interstitials that open the book, this beggar song and a fable. The beggar song, it says, "To Dundare they came at dead of night, for to seek the witcher maid, they ringed the hamlet from all sides and sealed it with a barricade. Seize her they would in perfidy, but their plans were all in vain. Ere the sun arose on the frozen road, 3 dozen brigands lay slain." And then the second one is like a fable about a fortune teller that tells this witcher girl that, I can give you everything you desire, riches, power, influence. And this witcher girl says, "I don't want any of this. I want a horse as black and swift as a nightly gale, a sword as bright and keen as moonbeam. And I wish to smite the forces of evil and darkness. This I would have." And then it closes with this fortune teller saying, "These are priceless gifts, and you must pay me dearly." And she says, "With what? I have nothing." And the fortune teller replies, "With your blood." Given these two openings, how would you say these set the tone for the chapter as well as for the book as a whole?
I think they frame the story in a mood of fatalism and survival. There is a moral ambiguity to it because it's implying that Siri will have to do what she has to do, even though she knows that she's going to pay for it heavily.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a pretty significant shift in perspective from the other books. So up until now, the books have kind of centered around, trying to hide Siri away, keep her safe, teach her. And when things don't work out, she's on the run. But this, beggar song and the fable, they kind of set it up as if Siri is now taking action of her own. And she's like seizing her destiny and saying, "I'm not hiding anymore. I'm going to confront my adversaries."
Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing about both of these, and we do this a lot in The Witcher, I think even more so in like Lady of the Lake and then like in Season of Storms, but we play with time and we hear kind of continually not just about our characters and like their present, but also like this, fables that are eventually told about them, songs that are sung about them, excerpts from Dandelion's ridiculous memoir. I feel like I don't think about this at the time I read it. I'm like, oh, this is cool and immersive. I wonder what this means. And then when I actually go back to read it later, it's, I think, more interesting. To one, know, I think, as a reader, where the book ends up, but also, like, this is where their legacy ends in some way. So I find that really interesting that like Sapkowski chooses to open almost with a sense of like foreshadowing, as you said, Sophia, there's sacrifice to be made, something bad is going to happen. I think, as you said, Brian, whatever Siri chooses to do will ultimately have some sense of consequence for her and will set her up as this mythological character on the continent eventually. And that's admittedly, again, something I don't really think about in the moment that I read it, but with kind of those years behind me, have like really thought about.
It's also a theme in the books that actions have consequences. This is not some fantasy land where everything ends up beautifully. It ends up very cruelly, and our heroes pay for it heavily.
Yeah, I think you both make really good points. I do think it's fascinating that Sapkowski often kind of offers us the perspective of, like you said, Alyssa, what is their legacy 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now? And he kind of plays with that a lot. I think even more so in Lady of the Lake, and we'll get to that, in later episodes.
Yeah, we'll cross that lake when we get there.
Yeah.
We see these interstitials a lot, and I think that they kind of builds the world in such a unique way. Obviously, it's about our characters, but it's not focused on them. And yeah, I love kind of the contrast between this and then what quote unquote really happens, as we'll see in this chapter. So Sapkowski opens his books with a recap rather than like a direct continuation of events, as you would normally see. How does the beginning of Tower of Swallows, with all this lore about like the calendars and like reckoning on the continent, and then obviously Vysogota meeting Ciri, how does this compare to the first chapters of Blood of Elves, where we were like under the tree Blaveris with Dandelion and the crowd, Time of Content when we were just with Applegat, my boo, for a whole chapter.
Your favorite character.
Yeah, he's a good egg. R.I.P. Applegat. And then Baptism of Fire, where we are with Milva uniquely. What do you guys think about that?
Unlike the other books that have an external openings with characters that we've never met before, this book in particular starts intimate and it's enclosed. It's just Ciri that we know already. And we have the introduction of Vysogota, but it's not very direct. We know very little about him. And it's more reflective and even claustrophobic because they're away from everyone in a swamp where nobody dares to venture.
Yeah, I do think it's also interesting that the book opens and we see Ciri in this state, but we have no idea why. He's playing with the order of events. And so I do think that's something kind of unique to this story in that we see where she ends up, but we don't know how she got there yet. And that immediately just hooks me.
Yeah. Sapkowski's done that, I think, like on smaller scales. So, like, I think the end of Baptism of Fire, he has Geralt kind of open a chapter being like, I think we made a mistake. And then, like, at some point it picks up when he's about to confront Milva about her pregnancy. Of course, we see that in the short stories with, like, the overarching framing narratives there. But, like, that was, my understanding, retroactively done. I don't think we've had, like, a full book of flashbacks effectively. So it's kind of just like building upon the devices that he's used before, but just at an entirely different scale. I think the interesting thing about this, Blaveris, Applegat, Milva, we open from their perspectives, but they are really vehicles for world building. So like we hear from Applegat's perspective how the kingdoms work and how currency works and like everything about being a royal messenger. And then from Milva, we hear her perspective on this is what it was like growing up as a maid and then being brought into the Dryads. And it kind of breaks open a new part of the world that we hadn't really learned a lot about yet. It's almost like the inverse to me. Like, I think because we basically learn more about a character that we already know. Like we learn about Ciri, but through Vysogota's eyes. And I feel like because it's more, as you said, Sophia, kind of like insular and like very isolated, I feel like he almost has to spend the first half of the chapter being like, the 8 points of the calendar that sometimes coincide, and they're really big places for like magical reckoning. But it does kind of like lay the foundation, I think, well. It's very immersive, I think, as you both have said, and very poetic.
Ciri also landing there out of nowhere also poses a lot of questions for us. Like, how did she end up here?
Yeah. I don't know if any other book has like really opened with like a central mystery, and that's probably, as Ryan was talking about, like part of that framing narrative.
Yeah.
But also like, yeah, that's certainly something that we're going to uncover throughout the book, which is a very compelling way to start.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of touches on what you were saying, where since we're getting this from the perspective of Vysogota and, at the beginning of the chapter, Ciri is unconscious and he's caring for her. He's describing her through the eyes of someone who doesn't know who Ciri is. And we do know who Ciri is. And so in that sense, I think two things are kind of happening. We get to kind of reassess who Ciri is since we were first introduced to her. So for example, we were first introduced to her as like a tween who was going to Kaer Morhen. And now we see how she's changed since that point in time. And it also offers the perspective of, who is Ciri to the average individual who doesn't know who she is and is trying to get something from her, or is, a friend of her who's trying to protect her.
Yeah, and Siri and Vysogota, like, I have that discussion explicitly. Siri's like, "You have no idea who I am," and he was like, "It kinda seemed like just a thief, like, and just an absolute brigand, like, am I wrong?" And again, like, for all intents and purposes, like, with all the information he has at his disposal, it's not, like, an incorrect conclusion. I found it really interesting. Of course, Sapkowski refers to Siri just as, like, the patient until she introduces herself, because Vysogota does that, because he has no idea who she is. I feel like as we're talking about this, I'm like, "Oh, man, I would love to read this chapter again for the first time," and, like, to feel like what it is for that mystery to unfold for a reader. I do know that there's someone in the Discord somewhere who's reading the books for the first time, and I feel like I'll have to give them a poke about it when I get to this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Vysogota calling Siri the patient also tells us something about him, that he's a doctor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before she wakes up, he has this just monologue just by himself and describing her as a patient. So from there, we make the conclusion that this is a professional doctor with years of experience. He mentions the tools that he has. And Sapkowski, he describes the place that he's staying in, like the books and all of the documents, whatever. I mean, we'll move on to that later, but Siri is a nobody right now for Vysogota, but a patient that needs help. His moral duty to save her, and he doesn't know what kind of person she is. And Siri is completely fragile and depersonalized. And for him and us, it's a mystery to discover because we also don't know what happened to her.
Yeah, I've often described Sapkowski's writing as efficient, and I think, like, it really is here. Like, we know nothing about Vysogota. This is a brand new character, and he does such a great job of marrying showing and telling. We understand very quickly that this man is a hermit. Part of that is just how he describes Vysogota puttering around the woods and how he finds Siri. And then he goes on about, like, no one could have seen it. Great. But when we actually kind of get to who Vysogota is, I think if you parsed it out, like really bifurcated, like if I was to introduce Vysogota purely by showing, it would probably be pages upon pages of, like, he examined the scar on her face. He examined, like, her nasolabial folds, et cetera, et cetera. If it was purely telling, he would probably have a conversation with Siri. But it really is about, like, the first time we see him analyzing Siri's wounds, he is talking to himself. So all of this is purely done with dialogue. But there's also, like, an element of showing in even just, like, the words that he chooses to use, that they're all medically correct words. Like, he's talking about what's happening in her, like, infraorbital region down to the masseter muscle, et cetera, et cetera. And then also throwing in, like, a little bit of show in, like, who he is, where he's saying all this out loud but isn't actually writing any of this down. And what a funny quality to take note of and to include about this character.
Yes, I think the fact that Sapkowski mentions that he doesn't take notes, he's telling us that this man has years of experience. Like, he doesn't even need to take notes.
I think that's a very good point, and it's something that I just found really funny, where I think I listened to the chapter, a few times over the course of the week, and even after listening to it a few times, I'm, like, still asking myself, "Did he ever actually write anything down?"
At a single point, it says something about, like, sloped writing, and then
Okay.
it stops.
Yeah. I think efficient was a great choice of word for it, where the dialogue he's having with himself shows that he is, or was a medical professional. But the fact that he is talking to himself like this kind of plays on the fact that, like, he's a hermit and doesn't really have anybody to talk to. So of course he's talking to himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, we get that he's a surgeon and he has practiced and he's not writing anything, of course, and all of that. But now we're asking the question, now how did he end up here in the swamp? So it's basically the same situation for Siri and Vysogota. They have this point in common. Like, how did they end up in a swamp just by themselves?
Yeah, and I think that's, like, a perfect segue to our next question, focusing on I guess, the relationship. So Visigota's name, of Corvo, and the elven rhyme link him to a raven. So this omen of wisdom, death, and prophecy. And in this chapter, Vysogota really watches, questions, and sometimes withholds from Ciri. How do the raven motif and then his equal footing relationship with her challenge our expectations for like a mentor in fantasy fiction? And then beyond that, what makes them good for each other?
I think that he's both a mentor and a mirror. He does guide her through these reflective conversations, and he lets her express her explosive emotions and like moral doubts. And she's very set in her ways after everything that she's been through. She has like a very fierce point of view about the word that it's like kill or get killed. There's a lot of like she has like a red in her eyes, like she's seeing like red, as you say. And he is still, after everything he's been through, and we don't know that yet, but he's still clinging to moralism, and he still wants Ciri to not get consumed in the hatred and the vengeance and just calm down.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's interesting because he clearly has the experience of, dealing with students. We
Yeah.
learn from his backstory.
Yeah.
He clearly knows how to kind of like direct the conversation and try and kind of guide the student or the patient in this case, like towards certain conclusions. But I think something that challenges the kind of typical perspective of what a mentor is he's clearly not figure to emulate, like no
Yeah.
one's going to want to kind of end up in Visagota's shoes of where he is in life right now. And he kind of shares that with Siri, where he makes comments about, maybe if I hadn't been so headstrong and hadn't been so, tied to my ideals, that, maybe I think I wouldn't have ended up here. So we see that he's not a perfect mentor. Like he's flawed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say as well. I think when we typically think of mentors, they're just like a beacon of morality, and then they often die. But, you think of like mentors like Yoda, which is, I feel like, one of the ultimate obvious ones in like science fiction and fantasy. And he's just there to dole out wisdom and then literally fades out of existence. As you said, Ryan, like Vysogota himself is flawed. And I think bringing together two characters who both have work to do and who both get a mutual benefit out of like engaging with each other, I think that there's something, one, really beautiful in that, in coming along for that ride as a reader. And then also really compelling to actually read because it makes their interactions a lot more interesting if they both have a character journey over the course of the book. Ciri, I think, despite her age, has seen a lot of hardship, which we'll continue to talk about throughout our discussion. And Vysogota comes from an aspect where everything has been theoretical and like, this is the way that the world should work. That's what makes a chapter of like purely dialogue genuinely interesting.
Yes, it's not a one-way transfer of knowledge and experience or wisdom from Vysogota. It's mutual, and it's a shared learning. He's listening to her and she wants to listen to him. And they both have agency, like they're both individuals who are independent. And that's what got them in that place.
Yeah, I think Vysogota says that as well. He's just like, I think we're more alike than we realize, and destiny must have had a good laugh, basically throwing us together, right? I appreciate, I think, Sapkowski's choice of this specific character in Ciri's journey right now, which is masterful. So looking ahead, Ciri claims that there's no such thing as kindness without calculation. This is when she kind of like first wakes up and she's still a little disoriented, but obviously very wary of waking up in this man's home, not knowing what has transpired before, if anything happened while she was like unconscious, that sort of thing. And she assumes that he must be helping her for some sort of ulterior motive. Do you guys think that her distrust is justified? I think both her individually as a character and then also just in general.
I think that her suspicion is earned because of what she's been through. There is a serial events of exploitation when it comes to Siri. People are trying to capture her, sell her, make money off her. Even the friends, if you want to call them friends, that she got together with, Missile and company. Each of them is trying or have tried to take advantage of her, like even Missile, the closest person. After going through all of these hardships, it has made her wary of anybody that wants to help her. And I think it's like valid the way that she feels after, and she is traumatized. Like what she's been through is not some light altercations. These are like heavy stuff, especially with Messel, because this is one of the most important relationships in her life. And even though she's young, she's 16 here, I think.
Yeah, or that's what Vysogota estimates.
So she's 16, and this is the first romantic relationship, if you want to call it that. It's very ambiguous, and people are always taking advantage. There's a lot of betrayal. If she keeps repeating that everybody's betraying me, everybody is leaving me. So she is used to being used, abused, taken advantage of, and nobody just does anything out of goodness.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because up until the time she gets separated from Yennefer and Geralt, her interactions have been very genuine. Like Geralt and Yennefer and Mother Ninika and Triss have all really wanted to protect her, teach her, keep her safe. But at that point where they get separated, that's kind of where things turn. And she's given, a harsh dose of her destiny and her reality. So I think it's a pretty interesting contrast. But I think this distrust she has also begs the question because we're seeing her, at the end of her journey, essentially, but in chapter 1. So it's like, what haven't we seen that we're going to learn about that has given her this distrust?
It's a universal concept because I think, especially being a modern woman that like lives in a modern city, this theme still holds true. Can we believe that people can be kind without some sort of ulterior motive? And I think there is a skepticism, even in the world that we live in today, where it is easy to be cautious. Like it's very easy to like kind of put up guards and like assume the worst. And I do think that, as you both have said, like it is a result of the worlds that we in Siri live in to have that assumption. I think it's a lot harder to assume good intent, especially if you have experienced hardship of any kind before that has basically, as you said, Sophia, like earned you the right to be skeptical. So I do think that like this idea of like forgiveness and like assumption of beauty and goodness is really hard to come by, I think, as you get older. Like, I think it's appropriate for Siri to be so cynical. And I'm really interested to like discuss how Vysogota kind of challenges that throughout the story.
Siri is also, she's physically hurt. She has a scar across her face, and she's just escaped people who wants to harm her, like in very cruel ways. So I think it's still in her body. It's like a physical reaction. Vysogota, he is physically close to her while she's unconscious. So she's like having this like physical reaction, like stay away, what are you doing? And all of that. So I think that's like valid. So she has a scar on her face to remind her of that. I think the scar is more of a reminder of evil.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Like she knows how close to death she was, and it would have been very easy for this old man in the swamp to do nothing.
Yeah.
It does beg the question, from her point of view, like, why did he go out of his way to save me? Is it real?
That is certainly a question that they explicitly ask each other and then get into like full arguments about, and something that we kind of see unfold over the course of the book. One of the discussions that they have is about ethics. In this excerpt toward the end, Ciri says, like, what is ethics? I knew, but I've forgotten. And Vysogota explains, it's the study of morality, of the precepts of conduct, of being decorous, noble, decent, and honest, of the heights of goodness to which probity and morality carry up the human spirit, and of the chasms of evil, into which malice and immortality are flung. And she gets immediately up in arms because, of course, as we just discussed, she has had a very tumultuous life and a tumultuous probably few weeks or few months. And she just says, the heights of goodness, probity, morality, don't make me laugh or the scar on my face will burst. You were lucky you weren't hunted, etc., etc. You'd see what chasms of evil are. Ethics? Your ethics are worth shit, Vysogota of Corvo. It isn't the evil and the indecent who are flung down into the depths. The evil and decisive fling down those who are moral, honest, and noble, but maladroit, hesitant, and full of scruples. That is, I think, a beautiful summation of both of their kind of values and what they, I think, come to this book with. How would you guys summarize that and then obviously connect it to broader Witcher themes of like morality, power, and survival?
I think it echoes the saga's theme that power and ethics will always be in tension. And Ciri, because of the series of events that were inflicted to her, she is obviously shaped by the trauma that she lived, and she prizes survival above everything, while Vysogota, he prizes morality as a compass, even in defeat. Like, he's been defeated multiple times, but he still is clinging to his morals, while Ciri is just tossing everything out of the window. And now it's action time. It's like words are not gonna do anything. It's action, it's killing, it's the sword. And we go back to the opening of the book, the beggar's ballad and the poem. It's a transformation for Ciri. She's a new person that we don't know, like, who is this girl anymore. She is blinded by rage, and she just wants to go out there and get her vengeance.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, he brings up questions that we ask ourselves every day, of like how in a world of differing cultures and beliefs and motivations can we as a society, agree on what is morally and ethically correct? And it's something that no one has really been able to figure out or agree on. And when systems are set up that push people into the dirt, like Ciri, it's very common to have this perspective of, there's nothing to be done. What does any of this discussion matter? And just kind of adopt this hopelessness, which is a shame. But also, I just have to comment that I feel like this is a very good example of Geralt rubbing off on Ciri, where she's kind of gained this talent for monologues, kind of throwing people's arguments back at them and, calling them out. And I just couldn't help but laugh because I was like, oh, this is just such like a little mini Geralt moment, and I just love the harsh criticism she gives. Like at some point in the chapter, she says, "You're wrong. You probably have some antiquated hermit calendar." And I'm just like, excellent.
Yeah, I think as Vysogota talks about, it is like that old raven and that like young swallow meeting and that contrast of ideals and perspective.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, Ryan, like he has had his journey, he has had his failures. He has a sense of kind of perspective on like, oh, maybe I could have done this differently. And this is purely speculative, but like maybe it is those extra 20 years in the swamp. It's very easy to be moral when you have nothing that's actually challenging you. Especially being such a tenured professor, all of these ethical debates are still part of Vysogota's belief system, and obviously to the point that he's now been exiled from two parts of the world because of this. It's very easy to say like, I'm an upright moral person, but you're not actually pushed to that edge of survival, as you said, Sophia, where Ciri has been. She has had to discover where her morality ends. and it is purely about survival. And then again, what she kind of brings to this conversation now is then that jaded, cynical perspective. More par for the course for The Witcher, though.
Absolutely.
And again, yeah, I really admire Sapkowski's ability to put characters in situations in which they need to figure it out, either through dialogue or through sword.
Yeah, like if you jump back to, one of the earlier Witcher short stories where it discusses the lesser evil and, what do you do when you're in an impossible situation? That's kind of what Sapkowski loves to do. Is he just loves to put people in impossible situations and be like, what can we do? Do the best we can.
Yeah, and you too can experience that in The Witcher 1, 2, and 3 from CD Projekt Red and see what you two would do with the trolley problem. So Ciri in this chapter, again, like she alludes to what has happened to her. And she describes destiny as like repeatedly betraying her. She talks at the end of the chapter, which we'll, talk about the composition of. But the ending talks about how all the lessons she had received turned out to be false and misleading. The promises made to her weren't kept. How this story of destiny that she'd been ordered to believe in betrayed her disgracefully and deprived her inheritance. And each time she tried to believe in destiny, she was made to suffer misery, pain, injustice, and humiliation. Would you guys say, again, in Ciri's context or in the broader human experience, do you think destiny itself is cruel, or is it shaped by how people interpret it and then therefore act on it?
I think the book leans towards destiny being human-shaped. It's cruelty from those who manipulate it. Ciri refers to destiny in this chapter, I think, as people failing her. She refers to Bonhart as evil. She truly believes that destiny is people. This is like the feel that I have from her perspective in particular.
Yeah, I'd agree.
She realizes that it's more than that, and that she has been waiting for like external individuals to take control over her life, while actually what she has to do is to become her own person, make her own decisions, and stop waiting for destiny or people to come save her or help her. And she needs to help herself. And this is how the definition of destiny changes from Ciri's perspective, of course.
Ciri's life up until now has been cruel, just so very depressing and hard and full of, tragedy. And I think she's coming at it from the perspective of like destiny is like a puppet master, controlling everybody's strings. And for some reason, the puppet master has just really put her through it. If you look at destiny from a passive perspective, then yeah, things are just happening to you. Like it requires you to take action to kind of overcome, you know, the actions of the people around you who in Ciri's case are really trying to harm her or use her.
Yeah, I think it brings up an interesting conversation about what is her right versus like how that plays into the idea of destiny. Because I think to believe that you're being betrayed also requires a belief that something else should have happened to you. I think there is kind of still that element of hope somewhere, and it just sounds like, she wants to believe that she could be the person that she was, or she could be better than she was. And then, she experiences, as it says, misery, pain, injustice, and humiliation.
I think Ciri falls into victimism a little bit in this chapter. Like, look at all of these things done to me. Everybody is trying to harm me. She is in a place where she's basically complaining, getting out of her experiences, all of the evil done to her.
Yeah.
So, and Vysogota is listening.
Yeah, I think that's certainly like a part of that healing process too. I think there's so much pain that she has experienced, both physically and mentally and emotionally, that I think almost starting from a place where she is at her lowest, where she is like physically injured, where she is mentally at her wit's end, emotionally spent. I think it gives us like a long way to go. And like, I think that healing journey, like the physical healing journey, also needs to be parallel to the emotional journey that she has throughout the series.
Basically therapy for Siri.
Yeah. Like, she needs it. She deserves to complain. Like,
Yeah.
I will, she has every right to complain. And I think that is part of, like, processing trauma, for sure, being able to claim her story.
I do think that before meeting Vysogota, her pain has been dismissed, and this is her opportunity to. And she's it's like she's challenging Vysogota, like, oh, I have it worse. Like, listen to my story. Like, oh, you think you've seen evil? Let me tell you about evil. The way that she tells him about Bonhart and what he's done to her friends. I mean, Vysogota is just quiet. He did not imagine to hear that level of cruelty. He created this safe space for her. He's not judging her when she's telling us what happened.
The other thing about destiny, obviously destiny, prophecy, huge part of like other mythologies, Greek mythology in particular. And as like a little delight for anyone who's also listening to Mike Schubert's The Newest Olympian, as we were talking about like Heroes of Olympus and stuff, the idea of destiny being cruel versus like being shaped by people's interpretation, how they act. You know, with Heroes of Olympus, one of the plot points that happens is that there's a prophecy that is spoken, the prophecy of seven, and Juno or Hera sets it in motion. And I remember one of the quotes from that stuck out with me, I believe from the first book or the last, was a character being like, because Juno decided to act on this prophecy and she took it upon herself to interpret the words of it, there were only so many ways that the fates could then weave the outcome. And like, I find that really interesting in that maybe it didn't have to be this way. Almost. And I think that's how she feels, where she's always been so open about as a child of destiny. There is something out there for her. Why did it have to be this version of that?
I think that's a really cool perspective. Like, I hadn't considered that at all. And, you know, if you kind of think about it from like, you know, hundreds of years ago or whenever it was that everyone heard Eithlein's prophecy for the first time, everyone hears that and then goes, maybe there's something that I can get from this.
Yeah.
You know, like the child of the elder blood, they're obviously very powerful. You know, what can we do with that information? And how, you know, those motivations shape what happens to destiny. That's a very interesting concept. And as goofy as it is, it makes me think of like Back to the Future almost. Where like,
oh, Biff has the fucking almanac too. Yeah.
like every time they go back, they kind of end up exactly where they were to begin with, but now there's new problems.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any serious analysis to like add to that, but like obviously reading both series at the same time, it did make me think about it, and goes back to the idea of like Siri having a right or believing she had a right to something else. And that's where the feeling of betrayal comes from. That's where the feeling of hopelessness comes from.
What happened with Siri is that there is a moment when she was with the rats and she completely forgot about her past. She doesn't even remember meeting a unicorn, or maybe it was a dream. And then it's the meeting with the Baron's daughter that brought her back to reality. And she remembers that I'm a princess. Like, look at the life that I'm living right now. Like, I am showering in cold streams. Like, I'm a bandit. Like, I'm doing these horrible things. Like, look at my face. There is this perspective of look at the life that I could have had, and it's been taken from me. And now I have to regain it.
So the chapter ends with Siri and Vysogota unseen in the swamp. And this is a very, as we said, divisive part of of the book. This book in particular, I know some people really love it. I know some people find it incredibly, I don't even want to say boring, just like repetitive, which, you know, it is. And as Sophia had noted, it's often like this pattern of like, had someone crept up after nightfall to the cottage and peered inside, they would have seen Siri and Vysogota, but no one could have seen that or heard it, for the cottage with the sunken moss-grown thatched roof was well hidden among the fog in a swamp where no one dared venture. Yeah, so we hear this kind of a lot throughout the book. And how does this framing really influence the reader's experience of Siri and Vysogota and of, I guess, the world in general?
It sounds like a secret, It's like we're the only people that know this information. And it feels like peeking through a veil, like we're close to their conversation and their thoughts, but physically we're removed. And we don't really know how far they are from society until later, of course. And it's just this secret that it's just for us, the readers.
Yeah, I didn't know this was divisive. I love it. Like I just think this is a really fun way to kind of tell the story, and I think it's a fun, motif to return to.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it's kind of like an interesting, like what you said, Sophia, that it's like we're hearing a secret, like we're the only ones who know this. And I think that's kind of a cool contrast to sometimes the story is like coming from Dandelion and his storytelling. And anytime that's the case, you're like, okay, take it with a handful of salt, like what actually happened. So I think this is a fun contrast where it's like, oh, we the readers, we're seeing the firsthand account, like what actually happened.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked about the idea of legacy and, mythology and what happens when these characters that we know and we love turn into these, like, almost abstract ideals. And Vysogota, I think, says this himself as he's like jotting down his notes. He's like, oh, I should probably write this down in case someone happens to find it before like everything turns to dust. And then he obviously doesn't. But this moment, I think, as you said, Sophie, it's so quiet and it's so singular. And I think that like it's very easy to kind of get caught up in their debates and feeling like obviously, like, this is their whole world right now. But then when Sapkowski makes us take a step back, yes, but it's such a small part of, like, the continent. It's, like, a small part of this, of what's happening kind of in the grander scheme of especially, like, the war and stuff like that. And we know that Ciri's being hunted, that there are literally armies mobilizing to look for her. But she has this little place of, like, reprieve and of, like, healing, even just for a moment. And yeah, I also find it, as we've spoken about this book, Tower of Swallows in particular, being like very poetic with a lot more prose building up, a lot more prose kind of contributing to the world building. I feel like having like almost a refrain throughout the book, like or a chorus, feels very like lyrical and very melodic. And I think is certainly effective. I think, like I said, some people really like it. Some people find it kind of laborious, but, I think it certainly serves its purpose to ground us again. And I think how unique this experience is between Vysogota and Ciri.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap our discussion today, do you guys have any closing thoughts on Tower of Swallows, Chapter 1?
We have learned a lot of things about Ciri. She is harder now. She doesn't trust anybody, but she is still willing to engage with Vysogota and listen to him and his principles and his morals, even though he is detached from society. And also, we have this new side of Ciri that there is this survival instinct taking over her. At the same time, she's healing by telling her story. And there is this debate between like morality and pragmatism, I guess. There is this isolation and connection at the same time. It's destiny and choice. And all of this is like playing in Ciri's head. She is still trying to find out what she's going to do and how.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also fascinating in this chapter that like this is Ciri coming back to who she is at her core. So for a long period of time now, since she's taken up with the rats, she's been known as Falca.
Yeah.
And in her conversation with Vysogota, she finally says, I am not Falca, I am Ciri.
Yeah.
And it's like almost in a point in the conversation where it seems like a non sequitur. Like he's saying, hey, you should really lay down, take it easy, you're still healing. And then she interrupts and says, I am Ciri, and like it's kind of establishing her identity again. It makes me excited because I'll probably go ahead and listen to the rest of the book now because why not? I'm like excited to see, her kind of claiming her identity again.
I actually did make that a question on this chapter, and then I yanked it and put it in chapter 11, the final chapter of the book, because I think it would be really prudent to discuss like why she would have introduced herself as Siri and like reclaimed that name after, as you said, Ryan, talking about like being Falca for so long. What is it that she's experienced that, back in chapter 1 will cause her to introduce herself as Siri to this man who, in theory would have no bearing on her life. So I'm excited to chat about that with Softy and Kitty in chapter 11.
I think if I summarize this chapter in one word, it would be recovery, because Siri is recovering physically, and she's like recovering her memory that's been foggy, but now she's like clear-headed. Even emotionally, she is recovering, thanks to Vysogota assistance, of course. This is a great book, and it's also a new beginning for Siri's arc as a Witcher girl in action.
I think I'd forgotten how compelling the start of this book was. And admittedly, when I went and skimmed through when I was making up the application form to be a guest on the show, I skimmed through all the pages. I was like, oh, nothing really happens. Vysogota just meets Siri. Are we going to have enough to actually talk about in this episode? Or am I going to have to tack this in with chapter 2? And then I went in and read it. It is a very straightforward, one sentence summary. Vysogota meets Siri in the swamp and he nurses her to health.
A therapy session.
Yeah. And then you get into the meat of the content, and there's so much more there in how their characters are meeting and what they both bring to their relationship, I think, with the life experiences that they've had and how that shapes the way that they challenge each other, I think is really exciting. And as I said, repeatedly, very compelling for us as readers to be immersed in. So I'm really excited to keep listening to this and having Peter Kenny on my commutes once again.
Always a joy.
Yeah. So that is it for our show today. Ryan, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hansa for listening. So where can people find you both? And is there anything that our community can help you with, or anything that you would like to share with them?
I have a website. It's sophiadesigns.net, and anybody can contact me through the contact form. And I would like to discuss even the Witcher books. I love them. I love the games. Of course, there is a new game and a new trilogy coming. There is a new book coming.
Crossroads of Ravens, yeah.
So I'd really like to discuss that. If anybody has any question about web design or The Witcher, I answer emails.
Lovely. Thanks, Sophie.
I don't really have anything to promote, but you can find me in the Discord. Happy to chat about The Witcher. Very excited to hear, the discussions that are to come in this season.
And thank you both so much for joining me again. Ryan, congratulations on your first episode of Breakfast in Beauclair.
Thank you.
And next episode, join us as we continue our discussion with Andrzej Sapkowski's Tower of Swallows, Chapter 2. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and a complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastinbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from Good Morning. It's hosted by Alyssa. The show is edited by Alyssa and Caleb Byes, with music by Alex Berner. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City, with Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Charlotte the Mangberg Glamour, the original Roach, Libby, Jonathan Leah, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, Miriam Tamaria, Softy, Lisa C., and Born Orpheus. Special thanks to Ryan and Sophia for joining us for this episode, and our international Hansa for their support.